Alright, I'm doing like a third take on this because I want to kind of get my point across quicker without without stretching it too long. So DistroTube has a shirt that says Debian is, or sorry, Ubuntu is Afrikanese or some shit for I cannot configure Debian. Now, I don't know how long it would take you to turn Debian into Ubuntu, but it would probably take a while. If you're actually doing everything yourself and you're configuring everything manually. Because like Ubuntu isn't just dot files; it's got a lot of shit built underneath it, especially like Snap and all that. So Debian is not Ubuntu, and I kind of this idea speaks to a broader mindset people have because Ubuntu is actually like the worst example you could come up with because it makes so many under the hood changes. And that's why it's so hard for Mint to rebase on Debian because there's so much stuff they have to do. But there's a lot of people that will say, why does Endeavor OS exist? Because Arch exists and you can just install some dot files. Or you can configure it yourself. And I was just having this discussion with people about Kali Linux because Kali Linux has a lot less of an excuse than Ubuntu because it is basically just Debian with a bunch of packages pre-installed. And I'm like, yeah, you could spend a few hours configuring Debian to be Kali Linux, or you could just install Kali Linux, you know? And that's something that people will argue with me, because while I'm not a huge fan of Zero Linux anymore, and I wouldn't use it personally, mostly because it's Arch based, people would say, why do you have a pre-rice KDE Arch when you can just use dot files? And it's like, yeah, that's a valid point, but you can say that about just about anything. Like all of these Arch-based distributions, yeah, they're just Arch at the end of the day, except like Manjaro, which has its own repositories and it's garbage. But other distributions that are like based on Ubuntu that make their own changes, like I don't see the problem. I don't see why they don't have room to to be there, because this is kind of what I said in an older video I made called Linux is Linux, where people like Chris Titus Tech will say, yeah, I can turn any distribution into any other distribution. And I'm like, no, you can't. That's not how that works. Because your repositories are going to be different, your versioning is going to be different, your packages are going to be different, availability is going to be different, instructions are going to be different, package management is going to be different, maintainers are going to be different, everything. Like all of these system hooks, whatever comes on your system is going to be very specific to that system. So, like, yeah, it makes sense from the mindset of I can turn Ubuntu GNOME into Kubuntu pretty easily because Kubuntu has just like a pretty basic version of KDE, which you can easily install on GNOME Ubuntu. But, like, how are you going to turn Ubuntu into Arch Linux? You can't do it. You know what I mean? That isn't really the point. It's, what I was trying to get at with that is that there's a lot of things that distributions do, and we don't really give them enough credit because all we see is what's on the surface. All we see is that whatever desktop they have. And I hate that idea that when you distro hop, you're just desktop hopping because that is not how it works at all. Unless all you're doing is moving from, again, Ubuntu to Kubuntu or Ubuntu to Mint or whatever, where you just want to use Cinnamon or you just want to use Mate or something. That's not how that works. And the farther you get into Linux, the more different distributions become because then you'll start getting into things like Void or Gentoo or Slackware or whatever, and you'll have a very different experience on these different distributions. So, but that doesn't invalidate these distributions that really are just pre-configured Debian. Like they still serve a purpose. Obviously, Debian is not a pen testing distribution. You can turn it into one, just like you can do with any distribution. You can make your own Black Arch, you can make your own uh whatever, you can make your own pen testing distribution, but why do that when you can just install one, you know? So anyways, that's kind of the point I was trying to make. I think that worked out a lot better. Thanks.